A black man jogging at 7 in the morning. That was it. Dennis Park pulled his cruiser across the sidewalk, hand on his gun, and told him he didn't belong here. Then a white man in the same gray hoodie ran past the cruiser at 12 feet. Dennis Park didn't turn his head, didn't blink, didn't move. He kept his eyes on the black man and tapped his silver badge twice, a habit he didn't know he had. You're casing houses. I was running. You have no ID. The man's faded wallet sat on the scorching hood between them, closed, 3 inches from his face, for 47 minutes. Dennis Park finally picked it up. Dennis Park was about to make the last mistake of his career.
Wrong move. He profiled the one. Man who hunts corrupt cops. Let's get into it.
The cruiser came out of nowhere. It cut hard across the lane tires, shrieking against the sun-baked asphalt of Elmwood Drive, and stopped. The front bumper angled deliberately into the sidewalk, blocking it entirely. The engine idled. Dennis Park stepped out. He moved the way men move when they have never once been told no. Slow. Wide. One hand already resting on the butt of his holstered sidearm, fingers loose and easy like the grip was something he had practiced in a mirror. The morning was still quiet. Oak trees lined both sides of the street, their long shadows striped across the pavement in the early light. A cardinal called once from somewhere above the roofline, then silence. Anthony Russo stopped running. He did not back up. He did not turn. He stood on the sidewalk in his faded gray hoodie and sweatpants, breathing evenly through his nose, and he looked at the patrol officer the way a man looks at weather. "Put your hands on the hood of the car," Dennis said. He had not moved from beside his door. "Right now. I don't care if you claim you live in this neighborhood." Anthony did not move his hands. "People who look like you," Dennis said, "don't belong here. And I'm not going to ask you nicely again." The words landed in the open air and sat there. The cardinal did not call again. Anthony uncrossed his arms. Slowly, deliberately, he placed both palms flat on the cruiser's scorching hood. The metal burned. He did not flinch. His breathing stayed measured, stays even, each exhale controlled through whatever mechanism a man builds over years of choosing stillness over reaction. He looked straight ahead. His face was empty, not defeated, not afraid. Empty the way a room is empty before something walks into it. Dennis circled the front of the vehicle. Up close, the duty belt was its own statement, black leather heavy, packed along every inch with the physical grammar of law enforcement authority. Taser on the left sidearm, on the right spare cuffs gleaming in 2 separate carriers. The badge on his chest was polished silver, positioned high and angled for maximum visibility. He wore all of it the way a man wears a costume he has confused for a self. Anthony's hoodie had a small frayed tear near the left cuff. The fabric had been washed so many times it had faded from charcoal to the pale gray of old concrete. Dennis stopped 3 feet away. He looked Anthony up and down with the slow, evaluating contempt of someone pricing livestock. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" "Running," Anthony said. His voice was flat. Not aggressive, not conciliatory. Flat the way a wall is flat. "Running." Dennis repeated it with a sound in the back of his throat that was not quite a laugh. "At 7 in the morning, in this neighborhood." "That's correct." "And I'm supposed to believe you just live here?" "3 houses down," Anthony said. "The colonial with the green shutters." Dennis's upper lip pulled back slightly. It was not a smile. It was something closer to what a dog does before it decides. He reached up and tapped the badge on his chest once with 2 fingers, an unconscious gesture, a signature move he probably did not know he had. He had been tapping that badge his entire career, every time he wanted someone to understand the distance between them. "You were casing houses," Dennis said. "I was running." "I don't believe you." Anthony said nothing. The oak trees moved once in a slow, warm breath of morning air. Somewhere on the far side of the street, a golden retriever clicked across the sidewalk on its leash, and Lauren Mitchell, her hair still damp from the shower, stopped walking. She watched from across the lane. Her hand tightened on the leather loop of the leash. The dog sat down beside her shin without being told. Dennis moved closer. He positioned himself between Anthony and the open end of the sidewalk, physically filling it, turning the space into something else. The cruiser was behind Anthony now. The duty belt pressed the edge of the space. Anthony stood between both. "Identification," Dennis said. "I went out for a run," Anthony said. "I don't carry my wallet when I run." Dennis tilted his head half an inch. "So you have no ID?" "I have a house 3 houses down. I can walk you to it." "You're not walking anywhere." Dennis took one step forward. The sole of his boot scraped the asphalt. "You're going to stay right where I tell you to stay until I say otherwise. That's how this works. You understand me?" Anthony looked at him. The expression on his face did not shift. Not by a degree, not by a muscle. He simply stood there and looked at Dennis Park the way a man looks at something he has already fully understood. His right hand, still flat on the burning hood, moved once. 3 slow taps. Index finger, middle finger, ring finger pressing against the face of his smartwatch in a specific, deliberate sequence. No sound, no light. Just the quiet pressure of 3 beats against glass, and then stillness again. Dennis did not notice. He had already turned away, reaching through the open window of the cruiser for his radio. He was already composing the story he would tell about a suspicious male uncooperative refusing to identify himself, acting erratically in a residential area where he clearly did not belong. Lauren Mitchell stood very still across the street, her retriever pressed against her leg. She did not take out her phone. She did not call out. She held the leash in both hands. Now her knuckles pale, and she watched the man in the faded gray hoodie stand motionless against the burning hood of a police cruiser on a street where he had lived for 3 years. She knew him. She had waved to him from her porch. She had seen him sign for packages, water the small patch of lawn beside his front steps, hold the gate open for her dog once on a Tuesday afternoon. She said nothing. The radio crackled. Dennis spoke into it low and certain, using the language of authority to build a small, precise, entirely false architecture of suspicion. Anthony stood in the sun. The hood burned through his palms. His breathing did not change. He thought about the thing that had made him right for this job, the particular quality that his supervisor had noted in his evaluation 9 years ago, and every year since, the capacity to receive pressure without converting it. Not absorbing it, not suppressing it, simply technically remaining outside of it. That quality had cost him things. He knew the price. He had paid it quietly, in the same way he paid everything without announcement, without expectation of credit. The smartwatch face was dark now. No pulse, no signal, no confirmation. Just the small, neutral face of it pressed against his wrist, running its functions in the background. Dennis finished his radio call. He came back around the front of the cruiser. He was smiling now loosely, the way a man smiles when he believes the outcome is already fixed. He thought he had stopped a criminal. He had no idea what the 3-beat sequence had just done. He leaned against the cruiser, arms folded across his duty belt, and waited. The posture was practiced, comfortable. A man in complete possession of a situation he had personally manufactured and now fully intended to enjoy. "You said 3 houses down," Dennis said. "Which one?" "The Colonial," Anthony said. "Green shutters, number 44. Dennis made a sound. Not agreement, not denial. A small, dismissive exhale through his nose that said he had already evaluated the claim and found it beneath serious consideration. He reached up and tapped the badge on his chest again. 2 fingers, twice. The same gesture as before. "People don't just jog through neighborhoods they don't live in," Anthony said. "Funny, that's exactly what I'm looking at." The words were smooth. Rehearsed not through conscious repetition, but through years of being never once challenged. Dennis had a system. He had used it so many times it had become architecture load-bearing and invisible. Identify, detain, control the frame. The frame said the man in the expensive neighborhood who looks like he does not belong is a problem, and the problem requires management, and the person doing the managing is him. He tapped the badge a third time. Anthony looked at the badge. He looked at it the way you look at something that is trying to do a job it was not made for. Then something moved at the far end of the block. A jogger, male, coming south along the sidewalk at an easy pace, earbuds and wearing a hoodie that had faded to the same pale gray as Anthony's own. The same color, the same wear, the same formlessness. The man ran with the loose, unhurried stride of someone with nowhere urgent to be on a Tuesday morning in a neighborhood where he clearly, obviously, without question belonged. Dennis did not turn his head. The jogger passed the cruiser at a distance of maybe 12 feet. He did not slow. He did not glance toward the patrol car, toward the black man with his palms still flat on the scorching hood, toward any of it. He ran through the frame and out the other side, his footsteps fading south along Elmwood Drive, and Dennis Park watched none of it. His eyes stayed on Anthony. The air between them was dense, still, and sour with exhaust from the idling cruiser. The engine had been running the entire time, pouring its heat out in slow, invisible waves that rolled directly across the space where Anthony stood. The smell of it, hot metal and half-burned fuel, clung to the inside of the throat. Anthony breathed through it. He had counted the footsteps of the other jogger. 13, 14, gone. That man, Anthony said, was wearing the same hoodie. Dennis did not look in the direction the jogger had gone. He did not blink. He reached up instead and adjusted the radio clipped to his shoulder strap, a small, decisive movement that said the topic was closed before it had opened. "I'm talking to you," Dennis said. "You stopped me," Anthony said. "You did not stop him. He wasn't acting suspiciously. He was doing the same thing I was doing." Dennis's jaw tightened. Not much. A fraction. A line appeared along the hinge of it just below the ear, and then it smoothed again. He took one step forward, slow and wide. The silver badge caught the morning light and sent a flat, hard reflection across Anthony's chest. "Are you telling me how to do my job?" Dennis said. It was not a question. "No," Anthony said. "I'm describing what I observed." "What you observed?" Dennis said it again the way he said everything Anthony said, with a slight delay and a slight alteration of emphasis, as if the words required translation from a language he found barely worth learning. "You're standing on the hood of my cruiser with no ID, and you want to tell me about your observations." "I'm standing on your cruiser because you placed me here." The badge came up again. 2 taps. A reflex now involuntary, the same way a man drums his fingers when his patience is thinning and he does not want it visible. Across the street, Lauren Mitchell had not moved. Her retriever had lain down in the shade beside her feet, chin on its front paws, watching the cruiser with the uncomplicated attention of an animal that senses something wrong. Lauren's hand, still wrapped twice around the leash, had gone white at the knuckles again. She knew exactly who Anthony Russo was. She had borrowed his parking spot once during a dinner party and left a note apologizing for it. He had slipped a response under her door that same night, 3 sentences telling her it was fine, that the spot was available on weekends, that she was welcome to at any time. She knew who he was. She looked at the officer. She looked at the silver badge. She looked at the sidearm on the right hip. She looked at the way Dennis Park took up space, the way the duty belt made his silhouette wider than his actual body, the way the posture communicated absolute certainty that no consequence existed for him on this street, on this morning, in the presence of this man. Her jaw moved once. She closed her mouth. She stayed where she was. Dennis reached up and smoothed the front of his uniform shirt. Deliberate, slow, a man setting down a tool he fully intended to pick back up. "Let's try this again," he said. "What's your name?" Anthony said his name. Dennis repeated it slowly, as if tasting something that had not yet revealed whether it was poisonous. He reached through the cruiser window and retrieved a small notepad. He wrote something in it. He took his time. The pen moved with the leisure of someone who understands that time in this context is itself a weapon. Every second that Anthony stood against that hood in full view of the street hands, flat on burning metal, built the architecture of guilt more completely. That was the point. He wrote, and the pen moved, and the badge caught the light again, and Anthony stood still in the engine exhaust in the morning heat and said nothing. His left wrist rested against the hood. The watch face was angled outward, unobstructed, dark and waiting. Dennis had not looked at the watch once. He thought he was documenting a suspect. He was handing his opponent a federal conviction, one line of his own notepad at a time. "Empty your pockets," Dennis said. "Everything. On the hood." He said it the way men say things when they have run out of reasons and replaced them with volume of authority. Not louder, just flatter. The tone of a door being closed on a room that had already been decided. Anthony reached into the left pocket of his hoodie. He removed his phone. He set it on the hood of the cruiser with a small, precise motion screen down without being asked which way. He reached into the right pocket. He removed his house keys. The metal hit the scorching hood with a sharp, bright clatter, a sound like something small being dropped from a height, and the ring skidded 2 inches before stopping. He reached into the small interior pocket at the chest. He removed a plain, worn leather wallet. He set it down beside the keys. He straightened. He put both hands back on the hood. He looked at Dennis Park and did not look away. Dennis stared at the wallet. It was unremarkable. Brown leather creased along both edges, the kind of wallet that comes from a department store rack and gets replaced every 4 or 5 years by someone who does not think about wallets. The surface was soft with age. The corners had begun to separate. It sat on the scalding metal hood between a set of house keys and an older model smartphone, and it looked like exactly what it appeared to be. Nothing about it matched the badge inside. Dennis picked up the wallet. He did not open it. He turned it over once in his hand, feeling the weight of it, and set it back down. "That it," he said. "That's everything?" Anthony said. Dennis walked a slow half circle to Anthony's left. Not pacing, positioning. He stopped where he could see both Anthony's hands and the contents of the hood simultaneously, and he stood there with his thumbs hooked into his belt in that particular posture that communicates complete comfort inside a situation of his own making. The morning had warmed. The oak trees were still. A sprinkler kicked on somewhere behind a fence 2 houses down, the sound of it drifting over the hedge line in a soft, rhythmic sweep, and then the wind shifted, and the sound was gone. Anthony's palms pressed flat against the hood. The metal had been in direct sun for 20 minutes. It was no longer uncomfortable. It had passed through uncomfortable into something that registered simply as heat persistent and total, working its way through the skin in slow, even increments. He did not lift his hands. He breathed. He kept his eyes on a fixed point on the far side of the street, not on Dennis, not on Lauren, not on the watch face on his left wrist. The watch face that was now angled unobstructed, precisely outward its surface, dark and passive in the morning light. Dennis crouched beside the front tire of the cruiser, ostensibly examining something below the chassis. He was not examining anything. He was letting the silence extend, letting Anthony stand in the sun against the burning hood, letting the watching eyes on the street read it as guilt by duration. Every extra minute, a man stands detained, cooperating fully with nothing. The more the architecture of suspicion becomes self-supporting. Dennis understood this. He had learned it early and used it often. He stood up. He walked back around the front of the cruiser. He picked up Anthony's wallet again. He still did not open it. "You said 44, Dennis said. Colonial. Green shutters." "That's correct." "I know every house on this block." Anthony said nothing. "I've patrolled this street for 6 years, Dennis said. He tapped the badge once. "I know who lives here." "Then you know I live there," Anthony said. Dennis set the wallet back down. He put his index finger on top of it. He pressed. "What I know," he said, "is that you have no ID, you have no way to verify your identity, and you are currently in a neighborhood where several residents have called in suspicious activity in the last month." He paused. "You fit the description." Anthony looked at him. The expression on his face did not change. His breathing did not change. Only his eyes moved, tracking to Dennis's finger where it rested on the wallet, registering it, filing it, and returning to the fixed point on the wall across the street. Across the street, behind the wide trunk of one of the older oaks, Lauren Mitchell pressed herself back half a step. She had the phone out now. She held it at her side, first screen against her thigh, and then she raised it slowly, framing through the gap between the tree and the fence post behind it. She pressed record. She did not announce it. She did not step forward. She stood in the oak's shade with the dog pressed against her leg and the phone raised and the breath held tight in her chest, and she captured the man in the faded gray hoodie and the man with the silver badge and the scorching hood between them, every second of it in silence. Dennis reached for his notepad again. Anthony's right hand shifted once. It was not a large motion. It was 3 centimeters, maybe 4, a small rotation of the wrist that turned the face of the watch from its angled position to something approaching perpendicular. Unobstructed, clear sight line to the sky. The watch face blinked. Once. A pulse of red, faint and immediate, lasting less than a second. Not a display notification, not an alarm. The kind of signal that exists in a protocol. Most people will never encounter a digital handshake between a device and a network that does not appear on any public infrastructure map. It went dark again. Dennis wrote in his notepad. The pen moved across the page with the same unhurried certainty as before. He wrote Anthony's name. He wrote the time. He wrote in the flat technical language of a man generating a paper trail the phrase uncooperative and evasive. He thought he was building a case. He was standing 3 feet from a man who commanded a federal tactical unit on a street where every second of his conduct was now encoded in 2 separate recording systems, one on Lauren Mitchell's phone and one pulsing silently through a network he had never heard of. He demanded obedience from a man who commanded an army. The clock was already running.
Wait. He actually forced a man to empty his pockets on his own street, just because of a hoodie. If that were me, I would have been terrified to make a single wrong move around that badge. Imagine standing in your own neighborhood, treated like a criminal, by the people paid to protect you. The audacity is real.
Dennis closed the notepad. He slid it into the chest pocket of his uniform shirt with the slow, deliberate motion of a man who has finished one phase of something and is preparing for the next. He squared his shoulders. He looked at Anthony the way you look at a problem that has ceased to be interesting and become merely administrative. "You're being uncooperative," he said. "I've answered every question," Anthony said. "You have no ID. You refuse to verify your address. You're obstructing a lawful—" "I've answered every question you've asked me," Anthony said. Same tone, same register, not louder, not softer. Flat, precise, a sentence delivered with the economy of someone who understands that repetition in this context is not argument, it is record. Dennis's jaw moved. The line appeared again below his ear, the same tension he had suppressed in Chapter 2, back now and less suppressed. He took a step forward. Anthony did not move. The distance between them was less than 2 feet now. Dennis was broader through the shoulders, heavier in the torso, the full weight of the duty belt adding a physical mass that was itself a kind of statement. The badge on his chest was at Anthony's eye level. Dennis had positioned himself this way, deliberately close enough that the sidearm was visible in the peripheral, close enough that the hierarchy of the situation was not abstract, but physical, measurable, in inches. Anthony looked at the badge. He looked at it the way he had looked at it before, without awe, without fear. With a mild technical interest, the way an engineer looks at a component he has already disassembled in his mind. "Last chance," Dennis said. You tell me who you are and where you actually live, or I call this in as a detainment and we do this the long way." "I've told you who I am," Anthony said. "I've told you where I live. Both times accurately." Something shifted behind Dennis's eyes. It was not anger. Anger he had felt from the beginning and managed easily. This was something else, something closer to the recognition that the standard tools were not producing the standard results, and that the gap between expectation and reality was widening in a way that had no comfortable explanation. He had stopped hundreds of people on dozens of streets over 6 years. They all moved the same way eventually. They got nervous or loud or defeated or bargaining. They entered one of the familiar registers, and once they entered it, the rest was procedure. Anthony Russo had not entered any of them. He stood against the hood of the cruiser in the morning sun, hands flat on the burning metal, and he looked at Dennis Park with an expression that was not defiance, and not submission, and not fear. It was something Dennis did not have a category for, and the absence of a category unsettled him in a way he would not have named and did not examine. He reached out and grabbed Anthony's shoulder. The grip was hard and sudden, the full force of the hand closing on the fabric of the hoodie, and he shoved, not a nudge. A shove lateral and deliberate, driving Anthony's body sideways into the cruiser's front quarter panel. Anthony's hip hit the metal first, then his left forearm, which came down flat against the hood, the bare skin pressing into the sun-baked surface. The heat was immediate, not the ambient warmth of palms against metal. This was the concentrated burn of a surface that had been in direct sun for the better part of an hour, pressing against the thin skin of the inner forearm, the kind of heat that does not announce itself gradually, but arrives all at once and stays. Anthony did not make a sound. He did not pull away. He did not tense visibly. He absorbed the impact and the burn with the same physical stillness he had maintained for the last 40 minutes, his breathing unchanged, his face forward, his body simply receiving what was happening to it and declining to perform any reaction for the benefit of the man who had caused it. This made Dennis angrier. He leaned in. His hand was still on the shoulder. "You think this is a game?" he said. "Low now. Private. The volume a man uses when he wants the words to land without witnesses. You think you can stand here and disrespect me and there's no consequence on my street?" Anthony said nothing. "I will put you in the back of that car," Dennis said. "I will write a report that takes me 4 minutes and ruins your next 6 months. You understand what I'm telling you?" Anthony looked at the hood of the cruiser, at his own forearm on the burning metal, at the wallet still sitting where he had placed it closed between the keys and the phone. He looked at Dennis. "I understand," he said, "that you haven't opened the wallet." It was the first moment since the stop that Dennis's expression changed in a way that was not rage or contempt. Something flickered, brief, almost imperceptible, a half-second of uncertainty that arrived and was immediately buried under the posture of total authority. He did not reach for the wallet. He released Anthony's shoulder. He stepped back 1 pace and straightened, recalibrating the way a man recalibrates when he realizes the ground beneath him has a quality he did not account for. "I'll open whatever I want," Dennis said, "when I decide to open it." Behind the oak tree across the street, Lauren Mitchell's hand was trembling. The phone was still raised, still recording. She had gasped once, quietly, both hands coming up to cover the sound before it left her throat, and now she stood in the shade with the retriever pressed hard against her shin and the camera shaking in her grip and her jaw tight and her eyes fixed on Anthony's forearm against the hood. She did not lower the phone. Dennis reached to his shoulder. His hand found the radio strap and stayed there, fingers curled around it, not transmitting, just gripping. He was about to pull the trigger on his own career. Anthony wasn't going to stop him. If you want to see how this corrupt cop's ego gets systematically obliterated, you know what to do. Now back to Anthony. Dennis made his decision the way bad men make decisions, quickly, without review. He stepped behind Anthony. Both hands came up, one gripping the back of the hoodie at the collar, one at the shoulder, and he drove Anthony forward into the cruiser with his full body weight behind it. The hood caught Anthony across the chest. His chin came down. His forearms hit the metal again. Both of them, this time the full length from wrist to elbow, pressed flat against the surface that had been absorbing direct sunlight for the better part of an hour. The burn was total. Anthony did not make a sound. Dennis's boot came down hard on the inside of Anthony's left ankle, kicking his feet apart with a single sharp motion. The sole scraped the asphalt. The sound of it traveled the length of the quiet street, hard and percussive in the still morning air, and then it was gone. Silence came back. Dennis reached for his cuffs. The first one locked around Anthony's right wrist with a sound that had no drama in it, just a click. Small and final and completely ordinary, the sound of a mechanism doing what it was built to do, indifferent to context, indifferent to guilt or innocence, indifferent to the forearms burning against the hood or the wallet sitting 3 inches from Anthony's face. The second cuff locked around the left. Anthony stood with his wrists bound behind him and his chest against the hood of the cruiser and the morning sun pressing down on all of it, and he breathed, in, out, steady. He thought this is the part where discipline either holds or it doesn't. He had been in difficult rooms. He had sat across tables from men with federal charges pending and watched them decide who they were going to be in the next 10 seconds. He had always been struck by how small the moment was. No music, no build-up, just a choice arriving in ordinary time inside an ordinary body with no guarantee of outcome. This was that moment. He was handcuffed on a public street. He had committed no crime. The officer who had detained him had fabricated a justification, used physical force without cause, and was now constructing in real time a paper architecture of guilt designed to survive scrutiny. The wallet was still on the hood, 3 inches from his face. Closed. Dennis had not opened it. That detail mattered. Anthony held it the way you hold a small object in a large darkness. Not because it changed what was happening, it didn't. The cuffs were real, the burn was real, the false charges being assembled behind him were real, but the wallet was also real, and what was inside it was real, and the 3-beat sequence on the watch had transmitted 11 minutes ago to a network that did not ignore transmissions. He did not know if it had worked, he had never activated it outside of a drill. The honest answer, the one he had enough integrity to sit with, was that he did not know if anyone was coming. The system was designed to respond. The system had always responded in drills, but drills happened in controlled conditions with confirmed infrastructure and teams already positioned. This was a Tuesday morning on a residential street in a city where the regional tactical unit had 12 active cases and 14 agents stretched across 3 counties. He did not know. In, out, steady. Dennis moved to the door of the cruiser. He reached up to his chest to the small black rectangle of the body camera mounted above the badge, and he pressed the button on the side of it. The red indicator light went out. The sound of it powering down was almost nothing. A faint click, softer than the handcuffs, softer than the boot on the asphalt, barely audible over the idling engine. But Anthony heard it. He heard it the way you hear a sound whose meaning you already know, and the meaning arrived before the sound finished traveling. The body camera was off. The record was gone. He was handcuffed on a public street with no police footage, a false report being constructed behind him, and a body camera that had just been deliberately disabled by the officer who had assaulted him. The discipline wavered, not visibly, not in his breathing or his posture or the stillness of his hands behind his back. But somewhere in the interior, in the place that no training fully reaches, something moved. A question arrived that he had not allowed before. What if no one comes? He did not answer it. He let it sit in the open air of his mind without feeding it, without fighting it the way you let a fire exist, without adding wood or water. Across the street, Lauren Mitchell was no longer behind the tree. She had taken 3 steps forward, phone still raised, no longer hiding it. She was standing at the edge of the sidewalk, across from the cruiser, fully visible, her body rigid with a terror that had shifted its composition. It was no longer just fear. It had become something heavier and more specific, the particular weight of being the only person in possession of a truth that is about to be buried. She was the only record now. She knew it. Her hand was not shaking anymore. She held the phone steady, both hands, arms straight, the lens pointed at the cruiser and the man handcuffed against it and the officer who had just turned off his own camera. She did not call out. She did not lower the phone. Dennis opened the rear door of the cruiser. The hinges moved without sound. He stood beside it, one hand on the top of the door frame, and he looked at Anthony with an expression that had finally resolved into something simple: satisfaction. Small and private, and entirely certain of itself. "You're going to jail," he said. "Resisting, obstruction. We'll see what else we find." Anthony looked at the wallet on the hood. Then at the edge of his vision, the face of the watch blinked. Green, small, one beat, gone. He said nothing. He did not smile. He did not move. He simply received the signal the way a man receives information he already suspected was true and waited on anyway, and he breathed. The cuffs were real. Hope existed. Its shape was still unknown. Dennis reached for the wallet. He did it the way he did everything on this street, with the unhurried certainty of a man who believes the outcome is already written and he is simply moving through the formality of confirming it. He picked it up off the hood. He turned it over once in his hand. He looked at Anthony, still cuffed, still against the cruiser, and he smiled the particular smile of someone who is about to prove a point they have already decided is proven. He flipped it open. The smile stopped. It did not fade gradually. It did not transform into something else by degrees. It stopped completely and immediately, the way a light stops when the power is cut, and what replaced it was not anger and not fear, but something that precedes both. A total physical stillness. The kind that happens when the mind receives information it cannot yet integrate and simply halts all non-essential operations while it tries. The badge was gold, not the flat stamped silver of a municipal shield, not the polished tin of a county deputy. Heavy, solid, deeply struck gold, catching the morning sun with a weight and authority that made Dennis's own badge look like something out of a costume store. Above the eagle, below the seal, the words engraved in the metal with the clean, unambiguous permanence of federal authority. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Supervisory Special Agent, Civil Rights Division. Dennis did not move. The wallet was open in his hand. He was looking at it. He kept looking at it the way a man looks at a document that is rearranging everything he thought he understood about the last 45 minutes, working backward through each decision, each action, each word spoken on camera and off, and finding at every point the same answer. Then the sound arrived. It came from the south end of Elmwood Drive first. A low building frequency, not sirens, something deeper and more deliberate, the sound of heavy vehicles moving fast on a residential street and not slowing early enough for the corner. Then the north end. Then both at once, converging, the sound doubling and compressing into something that registered in the chest before the ears finished processing it. 3 black tactical SUVs came around the south corner hard, 2 more from the north. They moved in a tight practice formation, accelerating through the last 50 yards and then braking simultaneously, tires locking with a single deafening shriek against the asphalt of Elmwood Drive, the vehicles angling in perfect coordination to form a perimeter around the patrol cruiser. Doors opened before the vehicles fully stopped. Agents in tactical vests came out fast and low, taking positions at the corners of the box with the economy of people who have rehearsed this until rehearsal became reflex. The quiet suburban street ceased to be quiet. It became something else entirely. Dennis Park stood at the open rear door of his cruiser with a gold FBI badge in his hand and 5 federal vehicles surrounding him and 12 agents in tactical positions at his perimeter, and he did not move. He could not move. His body had made the decision that movement, any movement, was something to be evaluated extremely carefully before attempting. The rear passenger door of the lead SUV opened. Gregory Voss stepped out. He was not in his chief's uniform. He was in tactical gear, FBI SWAT across the chest in white block letters, and he was moving across the asphalt toward the patrol cruiser with the expression of a man who has been sweating through his shirt since the moment the GPS ping hit his screen and has not stopped since. His face was white, not pale. White, the specific drained white of someone who has had 45 minutes to calculate exactly how catastrophic a situation is and has arrived at a number larger than he initially estimated. He reached the cruiser. He looked at Dennis. He looked at the gold badge in Dennis's hand. He looked at Anthony, still cuffed, forearms burned, standing against the hood in a faded gray hoodie. He looked back at Dennis. He said nothing for a moment. There was nothing that a moment could contain. Then, "Get those cuffs off him, now." His voice was level. It was the level of a man using every available resource to keep his voice level. An agent moved immediately. The cuffs came off Anthony's wrists in 4 seconds. Anthony brought his arms forward slowly, not from injury, but from the deliberateness that had governed every movement he had made since the cruiser first cut across the sidewalk. He looked at his forearms. The skin along the inner surface from wrist to elbow was red and marked with the faint linear impressions of the hood's surface. He noted it. He did not comment on it. He straightened. He looked at Dennis Park. Dennis was still holding the wallet. He appeared to have forgotten he was holding it. His thumb was pressed against the edge of the gold badge, and he was looking at Anthony with an expression that had finally completely lost every trace of the smug architecture he had built and maintained for 45 minutes. He looked small, not physically. Physically, he was the same size he had been. But something that had been occupying space around him, some invisible extension of the duty belt and the badge and the absolute certainty, was gone, and without it, the remaining material was considerably less than it had appeared. Anthony walked to him. He stopped 2 feet away, the same distance Dennis had used. He did not raise his voice. He did not change his expression. He looked at Dennis Park with the same icy, unblinking neutrality he had maintained since the first moment the cruiser cut across the sidewalk, and he reached out and took the wallet from Dennis's unresisting hand. He looked at it for a moment. Across the street, Lauren Mitchell lowered the phone. She was no longer behind the tree. She was standing at the edge of the curb, both feet on the asphalt, the retriever sitting at her heel, and she was watching with her mouth open and her free hand pressed flat against her sternum, recording still the lens catching every second. Anthony looked up from the wallet to Dennis. The system hadn't just shown up. It had called down the thunder. Gregory Voss did not hesitate. "Voss?" He crossed the remaining distance to Dennis Park in 4 strides, and his hand came up and found the badge on Dennis's chest, and he took it, not carefully, not with the procedural delicacy of a formal review board or an internal affairs hearing. He took it the way you take something back that was never supposed to leave your possession. His fingers closed around the shield, and he pulled, and the fabric of the uniform shirt dimpled and held for 1 second and then gave, and the badge came free with a sound like a small thing being torn from a larger thing it had no right to be attached to. Dennis's hand came up reflexively. Too late. Voss held the badge at his side. He looked at it once briefly with the expression of a man confirming a suspicion he had held for longer than this morning and longer than this street, and then he looked at Dennis. "You are relieved," Voss said. 3 words. No elaboration. The sentence had the weight of something that had been building for 6 years on a patrol route where nobody had ever looked closely enough or cared to. Dennis looked at the empty place on his chest where the badge had been. The fabric was bunched there, slightly torn at one corner, a small, pale disruption in the dark surface of the uniform shirt. He looked at it the way a man looks at an amputation, not with pain yet, with the uncomprehending blankness that arrives before pain in the seconds when the mind is still negotiating with the new reality. Anthony picked up his wallet from the hood. He picked up his keys. He picked up his phone. He set each item in his palm, checked each one with a brief neutral glance, and put them away. The wallet went into the chest pocket of the hoodie. The keys went into the right pocket. The phone went into the left. He turned to face Dennis. He reached down to Dennis's own duty belt. His hand found the carrier on the left side, the spare cuffs, and he unclipped them with one practiced motion, the metal coming free of the carrier with a soft, clean sound. He held them for a moment. He looked at Dennis. Dennis looked back at him. There was nothing left in Dennis's face now. The smug architecture was gone. The contempt was gone. The absolute certainty of a man who has confused a badge for permission was gone. What remained was something stripped and undefended, a face that had lost the thing it had organized itself around and had not yet found anything to replace it with. Anthony said, "Turn around." Dennis turned around. The cuffs went on with the same flat, ordinary click they always made. The mechanism did not know who it was closing around. It did not perform any judgment. It simply closed, and the sound it made was exactly the sound it had made 45 minutes ago on Anthony's wrists, and the street was quiet enough that everyone present heard it clearly. An agent stepped forward and took Dennis by the arm. "Dennis Park," Anthony said, "you are under arrest for deprivation of rights under color of law in violation of Title 18 United States Code Section 242. He said it at the same volume he had said everything else on this street, not louder for the cameras, not quieter for the intimacy of it. The same register, steady and flat and fully controlled because the words did not need performance. They had enough weight on their own. The agent walked Dennis to the rear door of one of the tactical SUVs. Dennis moved without resistance, not from cooperation, from the specific paralysis of a man whose entire operating system has encountered a condition it was never designed to handle. The rear door opened. Dennis folded into the back seat. The door closed. The sound of it was heavy and final, a solid mechanical click that traveled the length of the quiet street and then was absorbed by the oak trees and the morning air and the sprinkler that had kicked on again behind the fence 2 houses down. Elmwood Drive was still. The tactical agents began their post-action protocols. Voss was on his radio, voice low, the details of the incident moving up the chain in the compressed technical language of federal procedure. 2 agents photographed the scene. One collected the notepad from the front seat of the patrol cruiser, bagging it with gloved hands, the pen still clipped to the cover. Anthony stood beside the hood of the cruiser. He looked at his forearms. The redness had deepened slightly in the last few minutes, the skin tight and marked from the wrist to the elbow on both sides. He pressed 2 fingers against the inner surface of his left arm, testing. He noted the response. He made a mental note to document it. He looked up. Lauren Mitchell was still at the edge of the curb. She had stopped recording. The phone was at her side now, screen dark, her hand loose around it. The retriever had stood back up, pressing its head against her thigh, and she had one hand on the dog without seeming to know it. She was looking at Anthony with an expression that had traveled a considerable distance since the beginning of the morning. Anxiety to dread, to terror, to something that had no clean single word but lived in the vicinity of awe and relief and the particular disorienting vertigo of watching a thing resolve that you were not certain would resolve. Anthony looked at her for a moment. He gave her a small nod, once. Quiet. An acknowledgement that required nothing back and asked for nothing. She pressed her lips together and nodded once in return. He turned back to the cruiser. He looked through the rear window of the patrol car. At the empty back seat where Dennis Park had stood for 6 years behind a badge and a duty belt and an absolute certainty that no consequence existed for him on this street. He reached down and picked up the faded gray hoodie that had fallen from his shoulder during the arrest. He brushed the dust from the front of it with 2 slow passes of his hand. He looked through the glass. "I told you I lived in the neighborhood, officer."
This story is made up, but that feeling of absolute justice against a corrupt bully, that hits right in your core. I have to confess, watching a broken system get weaponized against the very tyrant hiding behind it is my absolute favorite kind of karma. Have you ever encountered someone who abused their authority? Drop a comment below. Like, share, and subscribe.